Hey, if you would remain standing this morning, we are just grateful that you are here, and you're in for a great treat. If I told you last week, I've been able to go up to Vancouver, British Columbia a couple times and speak for my friend Mark at his church called the Village Church. And I went for the very first time, 2010, when they were meeting in elementary school, and there's like 45 people there. And now there's 6 campuses and thousands of people to come, and God has blessed and moved and done amazing things. And so today you get to hear from Mark Clark. So I've told him that you're pretty awesome. This is the best service, all right? You're the best. So I want you to give a giant welcome from friends to Mark Clark as he comes to speak.
Thank you, sir. All right, well, thank you. Good to be with you. Thanks to Matthew and the elders for having me. Why don't you open your Bibles? Isaiah chapter 61 is where we're going to be. And here's what I want to do with you this morning. There's a lot of Bible verses that could define a life, that could give you an understanding of where am I going in my life? How am I going to accomplish great things in the world? I want to accomplish great things. I want to have meaning and joy and purpose in my life. I want to have a mission in my life. I want to understand why I wake up in the morning beyond just making money and buying shiny things and going on vacations. What is actually going on in my soul? Something I can live for, something I can die for. How am I going to actually accomplish great things? And many of us don't really know. And Isaiah 61 is a great passage that frames all of that for us. It starts to unpack the how and the what and the why of your life and where you're going and how you're going to get there and so on. And so it starts off in verse 1 by saying this: "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me." Now that's important because what he's literally saying is, if you're going to have power in your life, if you're going to accomplish much, if you're going to have meaning, if you're going to have something that you die for, live for, then where's the power going to come from? And right off the bat, he says the power, unlike New Age philosophy, unlike religion, it doesn't come from you, but it comes through you. It's the power of God that's going to actually do anything in your life if you want to accomplish anything in your life at all. Now, it's really important that we understand that that means that you need God in your life in order to accomplish great things. And the part of the problem is you start looking to yourself all the time. If I could just, find the divine spark within me, if I could just work harder. And the reality is some of you probably do need to hear the message that you need to work harder a little bit, like you're kind of sailing in your Christian life. You're mailing it in. You don't work very hard at all. I get to speak to a lot of conferences and church planters and church leaders, and they show up at these conferences, and their whole question is like, okay, give me the secret sauce to life. I want to grow my church. I want to do something significant, so give me the little secret. And part of the thing that I look at them and say is some of you just aren't working hard enough. You just got into ministry because you like drinking coffee in warm spaces and there's no heavy lifting in ministry, so you made sure that you became a pastor, but you're actually pretty useless. And to be honest, there's guys I've literally interviewed, and they come to me and I'm like, so what do you do? Like, what's your thing? And they're like, man, here's my thing. I journey with people. And I'm like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, I go into the coffee shops and I go one-on-one and I disciple people. I'm like, dude, I can't pay you to be a Christian, right? A Christian does that, all right? That's not what a pastor does, all right? I need more out of you than journeying with people. Like maybe have some skills, some competencies to get, all of that. And so some of you actually need to probably work a little harder, because the images that the Bible uses in regard to your salvation, the Apostle Paul writes to Timothy and he says, Christianity, you need to be like an athlete, a farmer, and a soldier. All of those are hardworking things, right? You get up early, you work hard, you work out, you go at it, you actually work for stuff, all right? It's beautiful. It's the image of a soldier because we're in the midst of a war. You know that. We're in the midst of a war of ideas. We're in the midst of a war for your soul. We're in the midst of a cultural war where you are getting defined things for you. Here's sexuality. Here's money. Here's family. Here's work. Here's what it's for. At every moment, there are messages coming at you that you have to exegete and say, what is actual reality? I got 3 daughters. The oldest one's 13. You can pray for me. Now I'm in the teen years. I have no idea what's going on. I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. All right, so I'm trying to raise these girls in the ways of Jesus. I'm reading them the Bible at night, telling them about Jesus. And my family that aren't Christians look at me and they say that when you teach your girls about Jesus, when you read them the Bible, when you go to church with them, the problem with what you're doing with them is you're brainwashing them, all right? That's what my family says, all right? Because they're like, you just brainwash them. You're not getting any choices yourself. You're just brainwashing. And every time they say that to me, you know what my response is? You're darn right I am. Because if I don't, then you will, or Miley Cyrus will, or Grey's Anatomy will, or whatever. Because it's going to say, here's what sexuality is. Here's what womanhood is. Here's what a body is. Here's what power is. Here's what to do with your family. And my job is to wash their brains in an alternative reality. In a kingdom that says Jesus is actually the one who gets to define power and authority and work and sexuality and womanhood for you, not the world. That's the war that you and I are in the midst of. Every single day of our life, we're in that war. And if you trust to yourself to win that war, you will utterly fail. So what the book of Isaiah is saying is, don't trust to your own power. There is a power, though, that transcends you, that transcends nature itself. And it's called the Spirit of the Lord God. And he's saying that's where you get your power from. Now, here's the beauty about that, is that you begin to realize that when the Spirit shows up and you figure out a life that submits to the power of the Spirit of Jesus, things start happening in your life that you could never ask, think, dream, or imagine. Because some of you sit here right now and you're like, listen, God could never use me to do anything significant in the world. I get it. You're up there, you're talking on a stage. It's kind of what you do. You know, you've done some stuff in your life, whatever, but you don't understand me. You don't understand what I looked at last night. You don't understand the mistakes I've made. You don't understand what my marriage is like. Some of you sit there and you make excuses in your life about why God can never use you. Let me tell you something. I'm the poster boy for God can never use me to do anything in the world. I grew up in an atheistic family. I didn't walk into a church until I was 19 years old. So, atheistic family, no Bible, no church, no prayer, no God, no nothing. My father was so atheistic that he made my mom spell my brother. So my mom wanted to call my brother Matthew. He was 4 years older than me. And he said, no, that's a biblical name. We can't call him Matthew. It's wrong to call him Matthew. I don't want any Bible in our life at all. This is my dad. And so he made my mom spell my brother's name with one T, so it wouldn't be biblical. So it's on his driver's license, it's Matthew with one T. 4 years later, they had me and called me Mark. Like, clearly he didn't see the irony in this. This guy had never opened up a Bible in his life. If I had a brother, he'd be like, I think Luke's a good name. We should go with Luke, all right? He didn't care about any of this stuff, all right? That was literally, his sister was a schizophrenic who killed herself. He was an alcoholic. He divorced my mom when I was about 9 years old. And the trauma of that divorce caused me to have something called Tourette syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder. So if you see me up here, twitching around, I make weird noises or whatever, it's because from 9 years old, I had Tourette syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder. So if you don't know what Tourette syndrome is, it's a way not to be cool in high school, all right, at all right? I do all kinds of wacky things. I make weird noises. Literally one of my habits growing up in high school was I would just swear randomly. I just go like, F, all right? I'd be at a bus stop, not the letter F. You're all nice Christians. I'm not going to tell you what I said. Use your imagination. And so I'd say, I'd be saying just F, just swear. Like I'd be sitting in a high school gym and it would be dead silent. And we'd be doing an exam. And I'd be sitting there and the whole 400 kids in the room, it'd be dead silent. I'd just, F, all right, just echo through the whole thing. Okay, so now, here's the one job you're never going to get when you randomly just throw F-bombs around, all right? A preacher, all right? It's not going to work. Everyone will be confused. They can't come to your church. You got to be 18 years old to get in. Everyone's like, welcome for God so love the F, all right? It just doesn't, it ain't going to work. The one job that a kid with Tourette's can never have is preacher. But here's the thing. God takes you not because of you, but in spite of you. And he does stuff with you that you never could have imagined. And so here I was in Canada. I'm 29 years old, and God says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to plant a church. Now, that kind of stinks because Canada, there's no Christians there. Listen, we are at least a generation or two ahead of you in regard to secularization, culturally, right? So in a sense, I come to you from the future. And I'm telling you, this is where your country is going, all right? And so I'm 29 years old, and God goes, plant a church in Vancouver. And I'm like, people in Vancouver don't like Jesus. They're against Christianity. They think that wearing Lululemon pants, eating kale, and carrying a water bottle is what connects them to the universe. And now I've got to figure out a way to tell them about Jesus. That's not going to be fun. So 16 of us get into my house, and everybody says, here's the only way that planting a church is going to work in Canada. You got to be nice. And so, because Canadians are nice, right? So it's like even that Canadian that won the U.S. Open, she apologized into the microphone for beating Serena Williams in her speech. They're like, you beat Serena Williams. She's like, I'm sorry, all right? It's like, that's Canadian, all right? That's what, and so it's never gonna work. You gotta talk to people in pear-shaped tones. You gotta say, you have ideas, I have ideas, we all have ideas. They're all great, sorry. All right, that's how you're gonna plant the church. That's the only thing that's gonna work. You gotta soft sell, you gotta talk to everyone nice, which to me, I was like, I'm not interested in that. Here's what I wanna do. I just wanna pick up a Bible and scream at everybody. And tell them that their life's a wreck, because they are. You guys, your lives are a disaster. You are sinful, you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. You are narcissistic, you are turned in on yourself. And if you don't even, you look in the mirror, you're so sinful, like the things you do in life. And if you ever doubt your own depravity, just look at children. Children are the most narcissistic, selfish, just balls of sin. You're just a 50-year-old version of that, man. So don't even doubt how sinful you are, how wretched, and that's in the Bible. That's Revelation 3, all right? That's Jesus saying, you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. And if we ever John and I right now are working on building a church. We need $35 million. If you have any stored away, let me know. But we're trying to build a church right now. And when we do, we're gonna put that verse over the front door. You are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Welcome to Village Church. That's the deal. So this is what I started doing. And so I just started preaching through the book of Matthew. We just got through the book of Matthew. It took us 3.5 years to get through the book. I would just preach word by, I'd get excited. I'd be like, okay, and Jesus went. I'm like, okay, the word and. All right, you got to understand, and is crazy. All right, and I would just rant about the word and for 20 minutes. It takes us forever to get through anything. But I started to say, listen, you're all a mess, but that's okay. You're not the hero of your own life because Jesus is the hero of your life. And you need to repent of sin, knock it off, and give your life to Jesus. And what started to happen is this Canadian culture of nicety started showing up and going, he can't talk to us like that. This is offensive. I'm gonna go get my friend, all right? And they'd go get their friend, and then their friend would show up, and their friend would meet Jesus, and they'd get baptized, and their marriage would start. And all this started to happen, and we started to grow. And we didn't really know what to do as we started to grow. And so we were in this gym, and we had to go to 2 services, the dreaded 2 services. And people were like, you can't go to 2. A lady walked up to me at the front of the church. She's like, we can't go to 2 services. This is going to be the nail in our coffin. I'm like, the nail? We're standing in a coffin right now? That's crazy, because we can't even fit the people in here. What are you talking about? And she's like, you don't understand. It's about community. I need to be in the same room as Janice, and we need to, Janice needs to come over for a potluck after. That's what church is about. Now you're going to go to 2 services. Now no one's going to know where anybody's going. Community's going to be shot. And I'm like, what? So the next Sunday I got up and I said, listen, I didn't start a church so you could make more friends. I started a church because every day people like my father die and go to hell. He died when he was 47 years old. He didn't know Jesus. That's why I started a church. So we're going to 2 services next week. And if you don't want to come, go to the church down the road, because I don't really care. The next week, we went to 2 services. We grew by 50 people. Well, okay, she left. So 49 people in a week, in 1 week. And the mission was off. Because, listen, when the Spirit of God shows up, it's all you can do to try to keep up with it. He's going to take your nonsense and he's going to make it a thing. Over and over, we've done these events, Church in the Park. So we do this event, it's called Church in the Park, very creative. It's church in a park, right? So it's 5,000 people get together in a park, and we sing about Jesus, and I preach about Jesus. I tell all these people they're sinful, and they need to give their life to Jesus. And last time we did it, we had 30 people signed up for baptism, and 96 people got baptized on a single day. People started coming forward, giving their lives to Jesus, getting baptized. 92-year-old women in their Sunday dress, just waiting to go for lunch, are like, I think I should probably give my life to Jesus, get baptized. I was very gentle, but I baptized her. Listen, there was one guy, he was coming, he's like, hey, listen, my girlfriend and I, got hammered drunk last night. We passed out in my buddy's house, and we're on our way home. And we walked by this park, and we heard about Jesus, and we gave our life to Jesus, and we want to be baptized. And I'm like, in the tank, I'm like, this guy's still hammered. I'm like, I don't even know if this is legit. Go, go, go. This is what happens when the Spirit shows up, and you're trying to control your own life. How's that working out? Miracles happen when the Spirit shows up. There are days when I don't even want to be, this is not true about Matthew because he's a good pastor. I don't even like people. And so there are days when I don't want to do my job. I know this is never for him, but for me, there are days when I'm sitting side stage of our church and I'm like, I don't even want to go out and preach right now. Because I get out here and I look out and I just see you and I'm like, buddy, you've been sitting in the same seat for 10 years. You've never invited a friend here. I know it, man, and I know what you give because I look. And I look out and I see all numbers over everybody's heads. I'm just like, you're a non-contributing zero, yet you complain all the time. You always ask me to do stuff. You give nothing. And I resent how they were raised and their parents. I just don't like them, and I don't want to preach. And so one day I was like, I don't even want to go out there. Like, you got to go out there. I'm like, fine. I went out and did like a Jonah. Like Jonah hated Nineveh, right? He just walked into. So I just walked out. I'm like, look, God hates you. Figure it out. I don't know. I just left. And the administrator sitting there on a Tuesday, she goes, what did you say on Sunday? And I'm like, what? We get emails or something? I don't care. She's like, no. We had people coming to Christ. We didn't even know what to do. They were just randomly walking up to ushers. We have to now train our ushers to lead people to Jesus because they're walking up, they're like, can you please lead me to Jesus? And the ushers are like, a bucket? All right, they're not trained to do this, all right? They just get money, fight off people who try to steal it, and that's it. That's the training. Now they got to disciple everybody, blah, blah, because what can God do with nonsense? His Spirit pours out and does something you could never ask for, dream, or imagine. How does that happen? He just told you, the Spirit of the Lord God. That's how. It's not you. That's issue number one. That's the how of your life. Now, the second point is about the what. What is going to be the content of your life? What is the thing that's going to define you? Because you live in a culture that's trying to tell you what the content should be. It should be fame, it should be money, it should be relationships, it should be power, it should be reputation, it should be success, it should be all these things. He says this, Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. That's the how. Then the what? Because the Lord has anointed me to bring, what's that word? Good news to the poor. What's the word good news mean? It means gospel, right? That's the Greek word gospel, euangelion. It means the good news about the person and the work of Jesus Christ specifically. Now that's important because your life isn't about just trying to get people to believe in God. That's too generic. Lots of people believe in God in Vancouver. Everybody believes in God. When I grew up in a non-Christian home, I believed in God, but I believed in the deistic version of him, the Bette Midler version, right? The from a distance, yes, man, like that version, all right? He's digging it. All right, so that version of God was what I thought. That's not good enough. You have to exegete God. You have to say, I'm not just talking about believing in God. I'm talking about the person of Jesus, the finished work, the life. He lived a perfect life in your place. He died on a cross, took on the wrath of God on himself, shed his blood instead of you, for you, and because of you, died for your sin, rose again from death to give you life. That's specifically the message of Christianity. It's not God generically. Sometimes I go into churches and I listen to a worship set and I'm like, we literally could have sung those songs in any Buddhist temple in your city and no one would have known any different. Because they're not about Jesus. They're not about the atoning work of what Jesus did to save you from sin. It's like a group of people got together and half got the point of Christianity. It's an adventure in missing the point. I'm sure I know what Christianity is about. You're so close, you hover around it. You have the right language, but you haven't really understood the gospel. It's like my kids. We were at Disneyland last year, and my daughter asked me to stand in line for 2 hours and 45 minutes at a ride. I was like, I'm not standing anywhere for, what are you talking about? And then the Lord's like, yeah, here's the thing. You got to model sacrificial parenting for her. So you're going to do it, and then she'll learn what it's like to be a mother and sacrifice her life for the sake of her kids. And so I'm like, divine moment. Okay, honey, I'll do it. And so I went and I stood in a line for 2 hours and 45 minutes at Disneyland. My phone died, so I just sat there like a psychopath and just stared out, just did whatever people do without phones, just looking at people. And she shows up. Daddy, thank you. Gives me a big hug. Now we're going to go on this ride, 2 or 3 hours of my life. And I said, honey, this is what you're going to do for your kids one day. And she looked at me and said, without missing a beat, she goes, no, I won't. My husband will. What the? What? How young do we teach these women this toxic nonsense? I'll just marry some fool. He'll do it for me, whatever. Adventure and missing the point. So close, so far away. That is many of you when it comes to the gospel. Let me give you an example. You read the Bible, and you read it, and you think you're a Christian because you're reading the Bible. The problem is you may be reading the Bible wrong, because if you're reading the Bible as if it's about you, you've misunderstood what it's about. The Bible's about Jesus. Now, take your classic story of David and Goliath. How have you heard it preached? If you grew up in the church, I've heard enough Bible stories, be like David, slay the giants of fear and anxiety in your life if you could just be like David. So muster up enough courage. What kind of message is that? That's religion. That's crushing you. That's what would Jesus do. And the problem with what would Jesus do is that you're not Jesus. So that message crushes you because all you're trying to do is perform. You're trying to be better. You're trying to be good. The problem is you're not David in the David and Goliath story. You know who you are? You're the Israelites who are deathly afraid, who run up to the hills, who are afraid of everything, who sit there and hope that a representative Israelite will go down into the valley for you and fight evil and then impute his victory to you even though you did nothing. That's what the gospel is. See, when you're doing your devotions in the morning and you're reading stories in the gospels about Jesus, and you're sitting there and you've got your coffee and you got your, it's 8 in the morning and you take your Instagram photo. You're like, hey guys, look at me. I'm doing my devos 8 times this year. Boom, but you don't know that. Here I am. So once that photo's done and you start actually reading it, now you're in this story about Jesus and he's hanging out with the prostitutes and you're reading it and you got your coffee, and then here's the fundamental mistake you make. In that reading, who are you in that story every time? You're Jesus. Right? You have lots of prostitute friends spiritually that you need to minister to, like Jesus did. You have to help them see the truth, so you hang out with the prostitutes around you at the Starbucks, so you can tell them about Jesus because you're Jesus in the story, because that's how you were taught to read the Bible. Fundamental flaw. You are the prostitute. You are the one who cheats on Jesus every single day of your life, and he loves you anyway. Not because of you, but in spite of you. That's how you read the Bible. Any other way will crush you. Any other way is religion. Any other way is, I shall perform for God, and hopefully God will love me. The gospel comes along and goes, no, you don't understand. God already performed for you in the person and work of Jesus. Now you get to be free because your whole life gets looked at from God, from his work for you, which means a couple things. It means that your whole life of comparison is over. You don't have to compare anymore to anybody else. Comparison is the toxicity of contentment. You can never be, you know it. In an Instagram culture, you sit on your phones and you scroll through and all you do is compare. She looks better than me. He looks better than me. They wear nicer things. They're more fit than me. They look more beautiful than me. And all you do subconsciously is compare and compare and compare. The gospel sets you free and goes, no, what are you talking about? Stop comparing. It will kill you. Right? I do enough marriage counseling where I sit with couples who are sitting and they're fighting, and he looks at her and he goes, listen, I was scrolling Instagram the other day and I saw Tina. Tina's looking really good. Todd's wife, Tina, she looks good. She keeps herself together. You used to look like that. These are real conversations that I have with people. And then she goes, what are you looking at, Tina? Why do you think I look like this? Who do you think did this to me? You did, fool. And the other thing I notice about Tina? She goes to Hawaii 5 times a year. When's the last time you took our family to Hawaii? You know why? Because Todd makes more money than you. So why don't you get a second job? Why don't you try to make a little more money? And why don't you live a life where your male friends actually respect you? Because I don't. And now we're in a conversation. Why? About what? You're comparing your life to somebody else's. And that's an endless pit. There's a reason that in the garden, God put Adam and Eve in the garden. And that was it. If Adam wanted another option, it was zebra. Right? That was all. The only eyes Adam had were for one woman. And when you get married, you have eyes for her and no one else. That's your measure. And so we begin to compare and compare and compare, and the gospel sets us free. He goes, you don't need to be anybody else. You notice the disciples, they all have their different roles. They don't need to become Peter. Peter doesn't become John. They all have their particular roles. It saves you from comparison once you understand the gospel. It saves you from thinking, because some of you do, that the mistakes of your past will destroy your future. And the gospel sets you free from that, because you are mistake-ridden. You've all made mistakes in this room. Some of you think, yeah, but I'm not good enough. You don't understand. Listen, I make mistakes all the time. Everybody in my church knows about the mistakes I make. That's what the gospel sets free. I tell my people, listen, in the early days of our church plant, I walked up to a guy and I said, listen, we're surrounded by an amazing Chinese community. I need you to reach them. So I want you to start a community group, and I want just you to start a Mandarin-speaking community group. You're going to slay it. You're going to reach all these great Chinese people around us. And he's like, that's a great idea, Mark. I'm Korean. I'm like, I know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying you'd be good at it. Or what? Or the time I told a woman that her husband was dead and I had the wrong guy. Yeah, that happened. I had visited this guy in the hospital. Call him Frank, because that was his name. And it was on a Friday, and he wasn't doing well, and I left and spent the weekend doing stuff. And then Monday morning, I was driving to the church, and I went and visited him, and I walked in the room, and I saw a man. Didn't look good. It looked exactly like him, though. And as I turned around the corner to kind of see him, the nurse grabbed my shoulder and kind of turned me around and said, excuse me, what are you doing here? I said, oh, I'm a pastor. I'm just coming to visit him and make sure he's okay. And she's like, oh, he passed away this morning. Now, for those of you taking notes, you want to go into ministry, you want to visit people for a living, whatever you want to do, principle number 1. When somebody says he's dead, say who? What's his name? First, middle, last, spell it out. I said, oh, he's dead. I'll go tell his family. So I drive to the church office. I go in, I tell all the secretaries, Frank's dead. Gone. They're like, okay, jot it down. I go into my office, I sit there and work for 2 hours. 2 hours later, secretary comes in, she's like, Frank's wife's here. She's got a Subway sandwich. She's going to visit him right now. I said, oh, no, he's dead. She's like, I know, but she's going to visit him. I said, oh, no, just bring her in here. I'll tell her. So she comes in the room. I said, hey, Frank's dead. At which point, she passes out into my arms. Then I put her on the couch, and we sit and mourn Frank for 45 minutes. We plan the funeral. I leave the room to go get some water, and I hear one of the secretaries talking about the hospital that Frank is in. And I'm like, that's not the hospital I went to. What are you talking about? They said, oh, no, Frank was moved on Saturday. I said, sorry, what? Call the hospital that he's at now. I want to hear this man's voice. Yeah, I'm here, sitting in my bed, waiting for my Subway sandwich. So I go back into the room. Hey, what's up? Remember that thing we were talking about? Just playing. She's like, I'm going to see him again in the resurrection. I'm like, actually, you're going to see him sooner than that. Because I had the wrong guy. Now, here's the thing. Satan used that in my life to destroy me. He said to me, I was 6 months away from planting our church, and he said, don't plant your church because you're going to hurt a lot of people because you're too young, you're playing dress up, you're pretending you're a pastor. Don't do it. Don't do it. And I had to have people come around me and speak gospel into my life, that the reason we're going to do this is not based on your performance for God, but based on God's performance in Jesus Christ for you. So get up and let's go. There are a lot of mistakes in this room, and you think that they disqualify you. God uses you not because of you, but in spite of you, because the gospel is true. You don't believe that. You have a religious paradigm, not a gospel paradigm. The last point, you have the how, you have the what. Now here's the why. Why do you get up in the morning? What do you want to do with your life? What's the why of your life? No one's going to tell you this. Here's what the Bible tells you. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, underline the word poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, underline brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. You want to know what your life is? It's about going out and freeing bound people. That's it. Figure it out. It's not about getting shiny things. It's not about getting a new boat. It's not about more square footage at your house. It's not about building a comfortable life. It's bound people. People who need to be freed by the reality of Jesus, and you've got it. Do not waste your 15 minutes, because there is an urgency here that needs to be felt in this room to figure out how to take all your money and all your assets and all your time and use it to free bound people. Now, here's the problem with that and why we don't do it. Because bound people are messy. And what we like to do is hang out with people who vote like us, talk like us, dress like us, think like us. And bound people, captive people, poor people are messy. They mess things up. It doesn't look nice. I remember when I first came to the church, I thought it was going to be, the last thing I wanted to do was go to church. I was a 17-year-old kid. I smoked weed for a living. I loved it. I became a Christian. 3 weeks later, I'm back. So I used to sit in this garage at Stacy's house and smoke weed and talk about the big things of the universe. I become a Christian. I go away. I read the Bible. I'm like, my gosh, I didn't give my life to Jesus. I explored him from a scientific and historical, philosophical. I come back into the garage, and now 3 weeks later, I'm telling them about Jesus, having to defend to all 30 of my friends about Christianity. I'm still high because we have the garage door closed, but we're talking about Jesus at least. And so I thought from my reading of the New Testament, when I would sit around, I'd smoke a pack of cigarettes, and I would read the New Testament, and I'd be like, man, I want to follow Jesus, but the church, that's going to be boring. And because my vision of the church was it was going to be shag carpet, orange, smell like mothballs, average age was going to be 200, and I didn't want to go there. It was going to be boring. But then I read the New Testament, and I was like, my gosh, this place, when I show up at a church, I'm reading Hebrews. Everybody's getting ripped apart by lions, stretched because the world is not worthy of them. And this thing's about the bloody death of a leader who gives his life. Man, when I show up to the church, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be raw. I'm going to show up. It's going to be whips and flares. Sit down. Shut up. All right? It's going to be tough. It's going to be crazy. We're going to be singing about the death and the blood and sin. It's going to be crazy. And then I showed up. And it was so nice. And it was safe for the whole family. It was hummingbirds sucking pollen out of flowers on the worship slides, singing prom songs to Jesus with a lot of fake green plants up front. And the music was I thought we'd be going to, like, have you ever read Matthew chapter 9 where Jesus goes, here's my vision for your life. You are a sheep among what? Wolves. Have you ever seen what a wolf does to a sheep? Just rips his face off, kills him, dead, eats him. And here's what Jesus says. Here's my wonderful plan for your life. You're a sheep. Death. And that's what we're going to sing about. I know it. Death. sheep death, wolves death. And I came in and it was, hey, walking on the water, everybody's nice. It's a weird thing. Poor, brokenhearted, captives, bound people. I showed up at church. I was the kid who had the big chain connected to my wallet because I didn't want anyone to steal my $10. Pulled up on a skateboard, chain smoker. I used to smoke. There was a sermon that was done where the pastor got up and he preached a sermon on being unequally yoked, right? Don't be unequally yoked. Don't date non-Christians. And so this guy walked up to my girlfriend at the time. I'd met the girl there. When I first showed up at church, I was like, I don't want this. It's going to be boring. And I showed up, and it was exactly like that. Mothballs, 200, orange shag carpet. But there was a pretty girl singing up front. And I was like, I'm in. I love church. All right, this is beautiful. And so we started dating. And so we're dating. And I ended up going to Bible college. And I'm first year of Bible college. This guy walks up. He says, did you hear that sermon about being unequally yoked? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, you need to break up with Mark. She's like, why would I need to break up with Mark? I don't understand. He's like, because he's not a Christian. She's like, why isn't he a Christian? He's like, I saw him smoking. Outside the church, I saw him smoking. And now I thought I was hiding. I was in the back. And I was smoking, and it was in front of this big window, and it turned out it was the senior pastor's window, and all the like worship people would be in there like before the service, and I'm like, so he says, you know, you can't date him because you're unequally yoked. And she's like, well, what did you see him smoking? And he's like, well, cigarettes. And she's like, well, it's better than what he used to smoke. Because here's the thing. Never look at someone in this room and judge them based on where they're at right now. Based on where they came from. That's what grace does. I hear church people talk like, can you believe what that girl was wearing in church? It was church. Can you believe what she was wearing? And it's like, did she have clothes on? Praise God. You know where she was a month ago? I'm not going to look to what she's wearing. I'm just going to... Here's the thing. We started our church to reach unchurched people. And what ended up happening? Who started showing up? Christians. And I was like, no, not Christians are the worst. I don't want Christians here. The best phone call I got was the day some guy called me up on a Monday, and he's like, what are you thinking? Some guy going to your church parked his Jeep on my lawn. His 2 tires were parked because there was no parking. They parked on my lawn, and I walked out, and I looked at him. I said, get your truck off my lawn. And he got out of his truck, and he was with his wife and his 2 little kids, and he looked back at me, and he gave me the middle finger and said, F you, I'm going to church. And I was like, boom, that's legit. That's who I want in my church, baby. Bound people. Captive people. That needs to be your life. It needs to be your life. Now, I'll close with this and I'll pray for you. Some of you are here because you need it. Some of you are here and you don't even know Jesus. You don't know God. You don't know any of this. This whole thing feels weird to you. And you doubt in your mind, in your heart that God exists, that you would ever think he's good enough or powerful enough or wonderful enough to ever give your life to him. Let me frame this for you. So a week after that terrible thing that I told that woman about her husband, I was sitting in my office and the pastor came up to me and said, I think you need to go visit her. I was sitting in my office and a voice told me, God told me that you need to go visit her. And I said, okay, I'll go visit her. I want to give it a week. I want to chill for a little bit. She can chill for a little bit. He goes, no, I think it has to be now. And I'm like, okay. I went to the secretary. I got her address. I drove to her house. Her car was sitting out front. I knocked on the door. I stood there for 15 minutes. The car was there. I knew someone was there. Nobody answered. I knocked. And finally, she answers the door, and she's like a 65-year-old woman wearing like a nightgown. And she's like, this is what she greeted me with. What do you want? And I'm like, I wanted to come and apologize. Can I come in? And I went in. And I sat there for 3.5 hours, and we chatted, and we talked. And I said, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm really sorry. And she said this to me. She said, do you know why I was so angry with you at the front door and so on? And I said, No, she said, because the last week of my life has been so torturous, psychologically, emotionally. I've never been through such depression in my life. After the swing of what you told me and have it not be true, it's totally screwed me up. And she said, I walked down the stairs today, and I walked into my kitchen, and I said, I'm going to take my own life today. And she said, I sat down on the chair in my nightie, in my living room, and said, I'm going to take my life today, Lord, unless you bring someone to my front door to encourage me. I fell asleep on the chair and woke up to you knocking on the door, the last person I want to see. If you don't believe in God, you got to recognize he's moving and doing stuff around you you don't even know about. And sometimes you even kick back and think it's not the best idea. And he's the one moving. He's what in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus says, you are serving a living God. Son of the living God. He ain't dead. He still speaks and still moves and still asks you to do things. The question is, can you hear him? Do you submit to him? Do you have obedience or just good feelings? Jesus, it is my prayer that each one of us would actually understand the mission that you have for us. That we'd understand the power comes from you, not from us. That the content of our life needs to be the gospel and not religion. And that we would die for this mission. That we would sacrifice our time, our energy, our money in the 15 minutes that you've given to us to do something significant for the glory of God and the good of people. Do that among us. If there are people in this room who don't know you and they're exploring Christianity, as a bunch I talked to in the last service, I just pray honestly that you would burn through their fear. Because I know that some of the reasons they maybe haven't believed yet have nothing to do with philosophical reasons or theological reasons. It has to do with fear. What would my coworkers think? What would my girlfriend think? What would my family think? Jesus, give them courage that they don't even have. Do that among us. Change us in whatever way we need to be changed today. Change not what we do, but what we want to do. Give us new vision if we're dying for some. In Jesus' good name we pray. Amen.